Blood pooled on the linoleum, the trauma alarm screamed, and the chief of surgery was completely frozen in panic. Dozens of lives were fading fast. That's when the quietest nurse in the hospital stepped forward, her voice echoing with a chilling authority that demanded absolute obedience. Who was she really? Clara Bennett was a ghost in faded blue scrubs. At 42, she possessed the kind of unremarkable quiet demeanor that made her virtually invisible in the high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled environment of Westside Regional Medical Center's Level 1 Trauma Unit. She kept her graying blonde hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun, spoke only when spoken to, and executed her duties with a mechanical, emotionless precision that most of the staff mistook for apathy. To the young hotshot doctors of Westside, Clara was just another piece of hospital equipment, reliable, silent, and easily replaced. No one asked where she came from before she transferred to the hospital 3 years ago. Her personnel file was remarkably thin, citing only overseas medical contracting and basic nursing credentials from a state college. She didn't participate in the break room gossip, she didn't attend the staff happy hours, and she never ever questioned a doctor's orders. Or so it seemed. Dr. Thomas Harrison, the newly appointed 34-year-old head of trauma, absolutely despised her. Harrison was a man who thrived on ego and hierarchy. He was brilliant Ivy League educated and entirely accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. He demanded absolute deference from the nursing staff. When Harrison walked into a trauma bay, he expected the seas to part. "Nurse Bennett, you're moving like molasses," Harrison barked one Tuesday evening, throwing a pair of bloody gloves into the biohazard bin. They had just stabilized a motorcycle accident victim. "I asked for the chest tube tray 3 minutes ago. If you can't keep up with the pace of a real trauma center, I suggest you transfer to the maternity ward." Clara didn't flinch. She simply handed him the sterilized tray, her eyes fixed neutrally on his chest, rather than meeting his glare. "The tray has been beside your right elbow for 2 minutes and 40 seconds, doctor," she replied, her voice soft, devoid of any edge or attitude. Harrison scoffed, snatching a scalpel. "Just prep the suction and stay out of my way." A young nurse named Liam Patterson, who was barely 6 months out of nursing school, watched the exchange with wide eyes. Later, by the medication dispensary, Liam leaned over to Clara. "I don't know how you take it," Clara Liam whispered, looking over his shoulder to ensure Harrison wasn't lurking nearby. "He treats you like garbage. And you're the one who noticed the patient's trachea was deviating before he even looked at the monitor. You saved that guy's life." Clara didn't look up from the vials of morphine she was logging. "Ego doesn't save lives, Liam. Protocol and observation do. Dr. Harrison is a skilled surgeon. Let him have his pride." "But you never defend yourself," Liam pushed. "It's like you just absorb it. Don't you ever want to put him in his place?" Clara finally paused. For a fraction of a second, something dark and tremendously heavy shifted in her pale green eyes. It was a look that made Liam physically take a half step back, a sudden terrifying intensity that belonged to a predator, not a subservient trauma nurse. But just as quickly as it appeared, the veil dropped back down. "The only thing that matters is that the patient makes it out of the bay," Clara said quietly, returning to her logbook. "Pride gets people killed." What Liam and Dr. Harrison didn't know, what no one in the entire hospital network knew, was that Clara Bennett was intimately familiar with how pride got people killed. Beneath her oversized scrubs, running along her left shoulder and down her ribs, was a jagged lattice of shrapnel scars. In her locked apartment across town, hidden at the bottom of a cedar chest, was a perfectly folded American flag, a Purple Heart, and a silver star. Before she was Nurse Bennett, she was Major Bennett. For 10 years, she commanded a Joint Special Operations Task Force forward surgical team. She had operated in the dirt under heavy mortar fire in the Korengal Valley, making split-second life-or-death decisions while Black Hawk helicopters screamed overhead. She had commanded heavily armed men, ordered amputations with pocket knives and tourniquets, and held the line when all hell broke loose. She had seen more blood, bone, and death before her 30th birthday than Dr. Thomas Harrison would see in his entire polished, sterile career. When Clara left the military, she was burnt out, hollowed by the ghosts of the soldiers she couldn't save. She sought out nursing, because it allowed her to save lives without the crushing weight of command. She wanted to be a worker bee. She wanted to be invisible. She took the abuse from arrogant doctors because, to her, their yelling was nothing compared to the sound of incoming artillery. It was petty. It was meaningless. She was perfectly content to remain a ghost. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It happened on a Friday night in late October. A torrential downpour was hammering Chicago, turning the streets into slick, dangerous rivers. Inside Westside Regional, the ER was experiencing a lull. Dr. Harrison was sitting at the Central Nurses Station, casually sipping an artisanal coffee and flirting with a first-year resident, while Clara restocked the crash carts in Bay 3. Then, the red emergency phone on the wall began to ring. It wasn't the standard ringtone for incoming ambulances. It was the high-pitched, relentless klaxon of a code black a mass casualty incident. Harrison snatched the receiver, his arrogant smile fading instantly. "Harrison," he said. He listened for 3 seconds, and all the color drained from his face. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the linoleum, splashing brown liquid everywhere. "What is it?" the resident asked, stepping back. "Commuter train." Harrison whispered, his voice trembling. "The 9:15 out of Union Station. It derailed on the elevated tracks and plummeted onto the interstate. It hit a convoy of semi-trucks. One of them was hauling industrial solvent. There's a fire. They're saying, my God, they're saying 50+ critical casualties. They're routing everyone here." Panic instantly seized the room. The nurses froze. Liam dropped a clipboard. Even the senior doctors looked at each other with wide, terrified eyes. A Level 1 trauma center is equipped to handle severe injuries, but 50 critical patients at once complicated by chemical burns was a logistical nightmare that could break the best hospitals in the world. "Listen up," Harrison shouted, trying to project authority, but his voice cracked. "Clear the bays. Put 2 gurneys in every room. Get the burn kits. We need everyone from upstairs down here now." Before the staff could even process the orders, the electronic sliding doors of the ambulance bay blew open. The sound hit them first, a horrifying cacophony of screaming, wailing sirens, shouting paramedics, and the sharp, coppery smell of blood mixed with the acrid stench of burning chemicals. It was sensory overload. Paramedics sprinted into the ER, pushing gurneys slick with blood. "I need a doctor," a paramedic screamed. "Tension pneumothorax, he's crashing. Severe chemical burns, she has no airway," another yelled, hauling in a woman whose face was completely unrecognizable. "Amputation. Bilateral leg amputation. Tourniquets are failing." Within 3 minutes, the ER turned into a slaughterhouse. Bodies were being unloaded onto the floors, onto chairs, anywhere there was space. The noise was deafening. Alarms from 20 different monitors blared simultaneously. Dr. Harrison stood in the center of the room, turning in circles. He was surrounded by agonizing death. A textbook surgeon, Harrison had never operated in a combat zone. He had never been taught how to manage systemic chaos. He was looking at a man whose chest was crushed, a woman bleeding out from her femoral artery, and a child convulsing from chemical inhalation. Dr. Liam screamed, holding pressure on a man's spurting neck wound. Dr. Harrison, what do we do? Who do we take first? Harrison froze. He looked at the man with the crushed chest. Get him to Bay 1, intubate him. We need to crack his chest, doctor. He has no pulse. His pupils are fixed, Liam yelled. I said get him to Bay 1, Harrison shrieked, losing total control. Tunnel visioning on the first patient he saw. He rushed over to the pulseless man, grabbing a scalpel, ignoring the 3 other patients around him, who were bleeding to death, but still had a chance to live. It was a textbook, catastrophic failure of triage. Harrison was wasting precious minutes and resources on a dead man, while salvageable patients perished. The nurses were running blindly, lacking direction. The ER was completely collapsing. From the corner of the room, Clara watched. She felt the familiar cold ice flood her veins. The noise of the screaming monitors and the crying patients suddenly warped and shifted in her mind, sounding exactly like the sirens at Forward Operating Base Shank. The overwhelming smell of blood and burnt hair transported her back to a dusty medical tent in the desert. She saw Harrison hyperventilating his hands, shaking so violently he dropped the scalpel. He was broken. The chain of command had disintegrated. Clara took a slow, deep breath. The ghost vanished. The commander woke up. She stepped away from the crash cart. Her posture transformed. Her shoulders snapped back. Her spine straightened, and she walked to the center of the trauma bay, with heavy, deliberate strides. She reached out, grabbed Dr. Harrison by the shoulder of his scrub top, and violently yanked him backward away from the dead patient. "Hey, Harrison," screamed, stumbling. "What the hell are you doing, Bennett? He's a black tag, doctor." Clara's voice cut through the room. It wasn't loud, but the sheer baritone force of it was like a physical blow. It was a voice designed to be heard over incoming mortar fire. It commanded the air in the room. "He is dead! You are wasting time." Harrison's face contorted in rage. "I am the head of trauma. You are a nurse. You don't tell me. Right now, I don't give a damn who you are." Clara roared, her voice suddenly booming like thunder, freezing every single nurse and doctor in a 20-foot radius. She stepped directly into Harrison's personal space, her eyes burning with a terrifying lethal authority. "Your triage is compromised. Your command is broken. People are dying on the floor. You will step back. You will shut your mouth, and you will follow my orders, or I will have security physically drag you out of this ward." "Do you understand me?" Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He was paralyzed, completely cowed by the sheer predatory dominance radiating from this woman he had mocked for 3 years. Clara didn't wait for his answer. She spun around her eyes, scanning the room with the rapid, mechanical precision of a targeting system. "Listen up!" she bellowed, clapping her hands together with a crack like a pistol shot. "Triage protocol is now MASCAL. We are abandoning standard care. We are practicing damage control, resuscitation. If they do not have a pulse, you drop them and move on. Am I clear?" "Clear," Liam shouted back reflexively, his military brat instincts kicking in. "Liam, take the airway cart. You are on red tags only. Needle decompressions and blind intubations. You have 30 seconds per patient. Go." Chloe Clara pointed at a senior nurse. "Start a massive transfusion protocol. O-negative blood uncrossed. Run it through rapid infusers. Ignore the paperwork I will take. The heat. Move." She turned back to a pale, shaking Dr. Harrison. She grabbed a pair of forceps and shoved them into his chest. "Dr. Harrison, you are the best bleeder stopper in this room. You do not think. You do not diagnose. You clamp arteries and you tie them off. That is your only job. Get to the woman with the amputated legs. Clamp the femoral." Now Harrison, stripped of his ego and running on raw shock, nodded dumbly. "Yes." Clamping the femoral, he scrambled to the floor. Just then, another wave of paramedics crashed through the doors. Leading them was a massive, scarred firefighter, carrying a limp, chemically burned teenager over his shoulder. The firefighter was screaming for a doctor. "Over here," Clara shouted. The firefighter rushed over, laying the boy on a gurney. As he looked up to give the patient handoff, his eyes locked onto Clara. The firefighter froze. He was a former Marine, a veteran of Fallujah. He recognized the stance. He recognized the utter, terrifying calm in the center of the storm. He saw the way she was directing the entire trauma center without a hint of fear. But more than that, as she leaned over to inspect the boy's burns, the chain of her necklace slipped out from under her scrubs, dangling a heavy, tarnished piece of metal, an officer's dog tag. "Give me the vitals now," Clara demanded, shining a penlight into the boy's eyes. The veteran firefighter swallowed hard, his posture instinctively straightening. "Yes, Mum," he said, his voice laced with profound respect. "Heart rate 140. BP is 90 over pulp. He's burning up." Clara didn't miss a beat. She barked 3 more orders to the surrounding staff, her hands moving in a blur as she secured the boy's airway. Across the room, Liam, his hands covered in blood, looked up from his patient. He watched Clara orchestrating the chaos, turning a hopeless, bloody disaster into a synchronized military operation. The quiet, invisible nurse who took everyone's garbage was gone. In her place stood a Titan, and the night had only just begun. For the next 4 hours, Westside Regional's emergency room ceased to be a civilian hospital. Under Clara Bennett's relentless command, it transformed into a frontline casualty clearing station. The standard, bloated bureaucratic protocols of modern medicine were entirely stripped away, replaced by the brutal, hyper-efficient arithmetic of battlefield triage. Clara moved through the carnage, not like a panicked nurse, but like a seasoned orchestra conductor directing a dark, bloody symphony. She anticipated crises before the monitors even registered them. Liam Bed 4 is going into shock push epiet and hang another unit of ONEG. She barked, not even looking at the patient, recognizing the distinct shallow breathing pattern from across the room. "Chloe, stop taping that IV, you're wasting time. Secure it with a pressure wrap and move to the burn victim in bed. 7. Dr. Thomas Harrison was on his knees by a gurney completely soaked in the blood of a middle-aged man named Michael Dawson, a transit worker who had been pinned beneath a crumpled steel beam. Harrison had successfully clamped the man's severed femoral artery, but the bleeding wasn't stopping. The pool of crimson expanding on the floor was growing alarmingly fast. Nurse Bennett Harrison yelled, his voice cracking with genuine panic, stripped entirely of its former arrogance. "He's bleeding out from the pelvis, I suspect, a ruptured iliac artery. We need to get him to an OR right now. I need a vascular team." Clara materialized beside him in seconds. She assessed the dying man's pale, sweat-drenched face. "The ORs are completely full, Doctor. All 6 are occupied. He doesn't have 10 minutes to wait. He has 2. Then he's dead!" Harrison shouted, his hands shaking as he desperately pressed gauze into the massive cavernous wound. "I can't clamp an iliac without an ultrasound and a full surgical field. I can't see what I'm doing in here. It's just a pool of blood. You don't need to see it. You need to feel it," Clara said, her voice dropping to an eerie, icy calm. She reached down and physically shoved the head of trauma out of the way. Harrison fell backward onto the bloody linoleum, too stunned to protest. Clara plunged her bare, gloveless hands directly into the man's open abdominal cavity. Liam and Chloe gasped. Several other nurses froze. What Clara was doing was a catastrophic violation of every sterile protocol in the civilian medical handbook. It was raw, desperate, and insanely dangerous. Clara closed her eyes, blocking out the screaming alarms and the chaos of the room. She relied entirely on the tactile memory, forged in the pitch-black, dirt-floored medical tents of the Korengal Valley. Her fingers swam through the warm, slippery darkness of the man's internal anatomy, tracing the spine, bypassing the intestines, hunting for the thick, pulsing cord of the descending aorta. Clamp Clara ordered, her eyes still closed. Harrison just stared at her, horrified and paralyzed. "I said, give me a damn Kelly clamp, doctor." Clara roared, snapping her eyes open. Harrison scrambled, snatching a heavy steel clamp from a tray and slapping it into her outstretched palm. Without hesitating, Clara dove back into the wound, navigated blindly through the blood and clamped down with brutal force. Instantly, the welling blood in the man's pelvis slowed to a crawl. The monitors, which had been plummeting toward flatline, leveled off. "Got it," Clara whispered, exhaling a long, ragged breath. She looked down at Harrison, who was staring at her, as if she were a ghost. "The iliac is isolated. Pack the wound tightly with hemostatic gauze. He just bought himself 30 minutes. Get him in line for the OR." "Where?" Harrison stammered, his eyes wide, completely abandoning his professional facade. "Where did you learn how to do a blind aortic cross-clamp, Byfield Kandahar?" Clara replied flatly, wiping her bloody hands on a towel. "You do it twice in the dark while taking mortar fire. You tend to remember the anatomy." Before Harrison could process the reality of what she had just said, the double doors of the ER blew open. Dr. Jonathan Webber, the 60-year-old chief of medicine, stormed into the trauma bay, flanked by Susan Collins, the hospital's senior administrator. They had been awoken from their beds and rushed to the hospital. Webber was a man of pristine suits and boardroom politics, totally unaccustomed to the raw, visceral reality of the ER floor. He stopped dead in his tracks. The sight before him was apocalyptic. Blood coated the walls, debris littered the floor, and the rigid hierarchy of his hospital was completely shattered. But what horrified Webber the most was seeing his star head of trauma doctor. Harrison sitting on the floor taking orders from a faded, invisible scrub nurse. "What in God's name is happening here?" Webber bellowed, his voice echoing off the tile. "Who is running this ward?" Clara didn't even turn around. Liam pushed 10 of ketamine. "On bed 2. Chloe, I need a chest tube set up on standby." Nurse Bennett Webber shouted, marching directly toward her, his face purple with rage. "You are out of uniform, you are breaking protocol, and you are acting vastly outside the scope of your medical license. Step away from that patient immediately." Clara finally turned to face the chief of medicine. The icy, predatory intensity in her eyes was fully ignited. "We are in the middle of a mass casualty event," Dr. Webber Clara stated, her voice dangerously low. "We have 54 critical patients. Do not interrupt my triage." Webber was incensed. He reached out and grabbed Clara firmly by the shoulder. "You are relieved of duty security." It was the worst mistake Jonathan Webber could have possibly made. Muscle memory is a terrifying thing. When a person survives a decade in active war zones, the body learns to react to sudden physical aggression faster than the conscious brain can process it. The moment Webber's hand clamped down on her shoulder, Clara's combat instincts overrode her civilian restraint. In a blur of motion, too fast for the naked eye to follow, Clara grabbed Webber's wrist, twisted it sharply, swept his leg, and slammed the chief of medicine against the nearest supply cabinet. Webber cried out in shock as his arm was pinned painfully behind his back, Clara's forearm pressed tight against his throat. The entire ER went dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. Even the groaning patients seemed to hold their breath. Clara's face was inches from Webber's, her eyes dark and completely devoid of mercy. "Never." She whispered, her voice a lethal hiss, "Touch me from behind, in a trauma zone again." "Do you understand?" She released him just as quickly, stepping back and smoothing her scrubs as if she had merely swatted a fly. Webber collapsed against the cabinet, coughing, rubbing his throat in utter disbelief. "You're fired," Webber gasped, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You're done, Bennett. You'll be in jail by morning. Harrison called the police." Dr. Thomas Harrison slowly stood up from the bloody floor. He looked at Webber. Then he looked at Clara. For 3 years he had treated this woman like absolute garbage. He had mocked her, belittled her, and used her as a punching bag for his own massive ego. But tonight he had watched her drag his ER out of total collapse. He had watched her save Michael Dawson's life with a maneuver most chief surgeons wouldn't dare attempt. Harrison took a deep breath, stepping between Clara and the chief of medicine. "No," Harrison said. Webber blinked. "Excuse me, I said no." Jonathan Harrison replied, his voice finding a new, grounded authority. "Nurse Bennett is not fired. She is the only reason half these people are still breathing. She is the only reason I didn't completely crack under the pressure tonight. You will leave my trauma bay right now, or I will hand you my resignation tomorrow morning." Webber and the administrator Susan Collins stared at Harrison in shock. The arrogant, self-serving prodigy was actually defending a lowly nurse, risking his own prestigious career. Before Webber could formulate a response, the ER doors opened once more. A man strode into the room, flanked by 2 heavily armed state troopers. He was wearing the crisp olive-drab dress uniform of a United States Army general. The silver stars on his shoulders caught the harsh, fluorescent light. It was Major General William Caldwell, the regional commander of the Armed Forces Medical Command. The chemical solvent on the derailed train had been classified military cargo, prompting his immediate dispatch to the disaster zone. General Caldwell surveyed the bloody, chaotic room. His eyes swept over the exhausted nurses, the furious chief of medicine, and the humbled Dr. Harrison. Finally, his gaze locked onto the woman standing near the crash cart, her faded blue scrubs stained dark with blood. Caldwell's stern face softened. He stopped, stood perfectly straight, and snapped a sharp, crisp salute. Major Bennett, General Caldwell's voice boomed with profound respect. "I should have known when I saw the survival statistics coming over the wire. No one else could pull 50 souls out of a meat grinder like this." Dr. Webber's jaw dropped. Susan Collins covered her mouth. Liam and Chloe exchanged shell-shocked glances. General Caldwell-Clara replied, her posture automatically straightening into a rigid stance of attention. She didn't return the salute, she was out of uniform, but she gave a sharp nod. "It's been a while, sir." "It has, Clara Caldwell," said, stepping forward. He turned to the bewildered chief of medicine. "Dr. Webber, I hope you realize who you have working in your basement. Clara Bennett isn't just a nurse. She was the commanding officer of the premier forward surgical team in JSOC. She holds a Silver Star for single-handedly holding off an insurgent assault on her medical tent while operating on 2 wounded Marines. You have a goddamn national hero changing bedpans in your hospital." The silence in the room was absolute. The weight of Clara's true identity crashed down on the hospital staff. The invisible woman, the quiet ghost who took their abuse without a word, was a titan of war. Webber looked physically sick, realizing how close he had come to destroying his hospital's reputation. Dr. Harrison just stared at Clara, a deep, burning shame rising in his chest for every cruel comment he had ever directed her way. "The crisis is managed," General Clara said softly, breaking the tension. She looked around the room. The chaos had finally subsided. The patients were stabilized, waiting for transport upstairs. The bloody symphony was over. Clara walked over to the sink, turned on the tap, and began scrubbing the dried blood from beneath her fingernails. "Harrison!" she called out, not looking back. "Yes." Ma'am Harrison replied instantly, the honorific slipping out, before he could stop it. Bed 3 needs his chest tube checked before he goes up to ICU. Make sure the seal is tight. Right away, Harrison said, moving immediately to comply. The ghost was gone. Clara Bennett didn't ask for the spotlight, and she certainly didn't want the glory. But as she dried her hands and walked toward the break room to finally get a cup of terrible hospital coffee, one thing was absolutely certain. No one in Westside Regional Medical Center would ever underestimate the quiet nurse in the faded blue scrubs ever again. Did Clara's incredible transition from silent nurse to combat commander give you chills? Sometimes the greatest heroes are hiding in plain sight, carrying the heaviest burdens with zero complaints. If this true-to-life medical drama kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Share this story to honor our hidden veterans, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable, heart-pounding tales.